Hi everybody, Loki the Scottish rapper here. I attended an event yesterday that was a discussion around universal basic income. First thing about it is that I think it's a good idea, but I do think that there would need to be some preparation in advance. The first thing is around consumer behaviour. So what do people do with their money, and what's the impact of the money that they spend? So a lot of people who live in poverty, the resources that are available to them economically, if you look at areas even just in Glasgow, housing schemes as you would call them, there are not that many options for people. You usually have a kind of off-sales grocery combo that's filled mainly with high-calorie, nutrient-void food and sweets. You have a chippy, maybe a pizza shop, a curry shop, you have maybe a bookies or a pub. So there's a lot of areas out there still, and a lot of small towns in Scotland where that's what's on offer for people. It can be surprisingly difficult to get a piece of fresh fruit, and you might be able to get fruit in a bag that's been sitting for a few days, and that's fair enough. But fresh fruit and veg are quite hard to come by. So people who are even trying to make a positive lifestyle choice, whether it be for their own health benefit or to set a good example in their family, or because they have a health problem they need to address, such as high cholesterol, problems with their teeth, oral health, diabetes, obesity, mental health issues associated with high sugar foods, fatty foods, processed foods, then it can be difficult for people to make adjustments, because these compulsions that have been set up as coping strategies to deal with the stress of poverty have made really strong emotional and physical and psychological associations with these foods which are manufactured to become compulsive. Imagine how difficult that is when you don't have a lot of money and a bit of chocolate at the end of the day is the only thing you look forward to, or a packet of cigarettes the only thing you're looking forward to. So it's really hard to address lifestyle in that context. And so if everybody has £1,000 a month or £100 and something a week, maybe closer to £400, £500 a week, then effectively what's going to happen is a lot of people are going to channel that money into the same things that they were channeling their money before. Because if we haven't developed consciousness around how we spend our money and the impact that has on us and society, then it just means that more of that behaviour is going to continue. And then the same thing is looking at what's fueling that sort of consumer behaviour where people are effectively undermining their own health through the products that they buy. It's stress is the chief activator of a lot of that behaviour. And then, of course, when we start to indulge in these products with, they're essentially legally addictive stimulants in many ways. At the level of the brain, how a lot of these foods that we eat react in our body and psychologically, it's similar to a cup of coffee or having a drink. You get the sense that you're relieving a stress by imbibing a thing into your system or ingesting a thing into your system, when actually you're setting up the compulsion to do it. So stress is one of the big issues in these communities, and I think that just now in society generally people feel increasingly stressed because there's a lot of visual and audio stimulus around, as well as the kind of toxic food chain. So people feel quite afraid, people feel fearful, people not always able to articulate or make sense of all of the different information that's out there. And so sometimes it can become easier to withdraw, to make assumptions about what's going on, about the nature of the world, and just look after yourself and not really venture beyond your ideological comfort zone. I think one of the ways that we could inspire people to come out and be more open and to engage in discussion is to be honest about our own struggles emotionally in our life. So, a lot of my politics are based on resentment. I was brought up in a community where it was okay to hate Tories, and not just hate Tories, but to find it funny if they came to harm, if they died, or if they were frightened. because that was the left-wing way in my community. Now, I can understand why that was the way it was, but no one ever wanted to explain that I'm using the same part of my brain a racist uses to think like that. And so really, like in this day and age, it would be about moving beyond that sort of tribalism and saying, here are a lot of the common problems that we have, and one of my problems is that, I look at the world, it makes me afraid, it makes me anxious, it makes me stressed, it makes me feel resentment, and then so I choose a form of politics that legitimises that, and also I consume various products to ease the stress. And it feels like in order to address the lifestyle problem, we need a new frontier in politics, which is about addressing this area of the human experience and how society feels for us, regardless of our identity, regardless of where we are on the privilege scale, regardless of where we are on the political spectrum. We are all struggling with the same stuff. We're all concealing our true motives and intentions at certain points in life and presenting a very kind of refined, publicly acceptable, socially acceptable version of ourselves, and we're entrenched in our politics and we're entrenched in our worldview, and this is making us deeply unhappy. If there's a way to link that truth with the concept of UBI and exploring how developing a consciousness, a critical consciousness around our own behaviour, what motivates our consumer behaviour, how do we change our thinking habits? Before we try to reorder the world around our limitations, we need to have honest conversations about what's driving us. The other thing is, a lot of the problems that we see globally, whether it be climate change or whether it be geopolitical tensions between alliances and countries, a lot of that and the threat of like nuclear conflict, a lot of that is driven by us as citizens or consumers. And let me explain how. Climate change is a no-brainer in terms of the link between how we live our lives, our consumer behaviour, the lifestyles that we're accustomed to, and how this impacts the environment, right? But then also, our governments are under pressure to maintain that lifestyle and to maintain the sort of lifestyle that we've become accustomed to, and so they battle with other countries in order to keep control over cheap access to the resources, the natural resources that we require in order to basically underwrite our whole way of life. Unless you address the stuff that I said earlier, where on a mass scale we're developing a consciousness around the link between how we think and feel and the human experience of a society, how that drives consumer behaviour, how consumer behaviour, the culmination of it all, creates the sort of lifestyle of the society, and how that needs to be maintained by our governments globally, and that this has an environmental impact, and that this has a geopolitical impact, right down to me sitting here right now, emotionally feeling something and running out and buying a packet of Haribos and a can of Coca-Cola. Not because I'm hungry, but because I feel like the situation that I'm in is not quite right until I have those things. It seems to me the best way to arm oneself is not to necessarily reorder the world around your limitations, but to face your limitations and talk about them. And self-knowledge is the best way to arm oneself. And that it seems to me UBI will not fly as a concept, or will not be workable as a concept, until we start having that conversation. And I think the way to get people into that conversation is to we ourselves talk honestly about how we're actually struggling as people in a confusing world full of contradictions, full of stimulus, both audio, visually, and then obviously the food chain and the challenges that we face in terms of regulating our own behaviour and regulating our own thinking. And I think the final thing to mention is that UBI ultimately is about wealth redistribution. However, if we don't change consumer behaviour and thus change the choices that are available, Because companies will change what they offer us if we demand it. This is one of the good things about capitalism. However, that process is very counterintuitive and difficult and sometimes quite political in nature, and therefore it can be very slowly paced. However, if consumer behaviour and what drives consumer behaviour was at the heart of a discussion, then we might see a lot of the companies changing the range of products that are available, or we might see companies being broken down into smaller companies, or God forbid, we might become creators and entrepreneurs ourselves. And this is where I see UBI potentially being a great thing, because it means that we have a bit of social and economic and cultural capital to create the sort of society that we want to live in, that's a reflection of our new critical consciousness around how we think and feel and how that manifests and expresses itself in our consumer behaviour. If you don't have that, or even aspire to conversate around such things, then ultimately what we'll be doing is we'll be handing our money as a collective to the same 1% already, except it'll be a guaranteed increased amount we'll be handing over. So it's the state writing a blank cheque to private capital, and so that is where ultimately I feel this idea of addressing the human experience, how it's linked with consumer behaviour, how that's linked with problems with the environment and geopolitical tensions and all of these things. That's why it's important. UBI ultimately, theoretically, could accelerate and entrench a lot of the problems that we see, unless there is a conversation which is more human in nature and less about the political jargon and more about, look man, are you not exhausted? Are you not exhausted with how you feel? Are you not exhausted with another bag of chips? Are you not exhausted with another cup of coffee? And do you think the answer is trying to get the government to shut down Starbucks? Or do you think the answer's here? Think locally, act globally. It doesn't get more local than me prying into my own soul and looking into the dark corners of my own heart and asking myself, why do I feel so bad that I'm going to undermine and shorten my own lifespan and potentially place civilization under threat by whimsically purchasing products that I know are killing me and that I know are bad for the environment? And that's the new frontier, and that requires honest, self-aware activists, as well as political people, as well as right-on people, and so on and so forth. It requires people that are going to be fearless and going to be rigorous in terms of not just scrutinising the power around them, but turning and casting that critical gaze on themselves, sometimes in front of other people. And I think that is a message with enough depth to it, that you might get people who aren't interested in politics or disinterested in politics back interested in it again. And it's based around something that we all have in common, regardless of where we originated, regardless of how privileged we are, regardless of our identity. We are all struggling with this area of life. So I wonder what people out there thought. If you want to leave some comments below. Thanks for listening, and look out for more events in Glasgow or in your area around universal basic income, because it's a really interesting topic for a diverse array of perspectives to come together and finally see people that they disagree with in person and realise that they're not actually the bogeyman that we all imagine in our heads. Take it easy.